The Mafia boss thought he found a bartender. He actually let a 20-year revenge ghost walk into his club. Victor Moretti asked one question, and this woman blew up his entire empire in seconds. She knew about the fake manifests, the missing container, the mole inside the organization, and then dropped the nuclear twist. The shipment contained children, and his own right-hand man had been selling his operation out for millions. But the real insanity? The woman wasn't there to survive. She had already sent the evidence out, set a 6 a.m. deadline, and came fully ready to die if that's what it took to destroy them all.
Eels. For provocations far less severe than this, Victor Moretti had authored endings. A gravitational stillness settled over the room, pressing the very air into silence. Here, Eels, a dozen of his most tenured lieutenants bore witness as a lone waitress refused to yield, her chin held level, her hands a study in steadiness. There was no concession, no quiet apology. She had provided the incorrect answer, Eels, and had done so with intention. It was like watching a figure step willingly into the heart of a furnace. This document is a chronicle of that case to its certain conclusion, Eels. Mark your geographic coordinates in the comments to chart the story's fallout. The corrosion of an empire began with a single question he was unaccustomed to asking twice. Eels. Victor never repeated an order. This was not a preference. It was the physics of his Chicago organization, a law understood equally by the city officials on his ledger and the priests who took his vacant confessions. Eels. To force Victor Moretti to say something a second time was to nominate oneself for oblivion. He spoke, you acted. For 23 years this axiom had held firm. She was the first fisher in that foundation, Eels. The man himself was settled at the far end of a mahogany bar inside the Meridian, a club absent from any city register, that poured spirits without a permit, and whose doors opened only for those who held the sanction of Victor's inner circle, Eels. The woman possessed the uniform of the staff, a simple white blouse, black slacks, a small silver pin. Her hair was pulled back into a severe knot, Eels. Her face was a mask of professional neutrality. For 3 hours she had served drinks with a spare, mechanical precision. Victor had observed her for 40 minutes prior to his approach. Tell me your name, he'd commanded. Emily, she returned, Eels. Your family? Carter. He allowed the silence to hang between them, appraising her. How long have you been in my employ, Emily Carter? 6 weeks, she stated. He gave a slow, measured nod. Eels. I posed a question to you earlier, regarding the Collins shipment. You informed Ronnie that you were ignorant of the matter. She continued polishing a glass, her attention absolute. That is correct. I am posing the question once more, Victor said. Eels. What is your knowledge of the Collins shipment? The quality of the quiet in the room did not change. Eels. It was already absolute, but the silence itself transformed, acquiring a density, the way air becomes heavy and electric before a lightning strike. Near the far wall, 2 of Victor's men adjusted their footing, a minute signal of rising tension. Eels. Frank Caruso, Victor's head of logistics and a man shaped from granite who had been a statue for an hour, placed his drink on the bar with a quiet finality. Emily Carter finally lifted her eyes from her task. I know it failed to arrive, she said, Eels, and I know you are already informed as to why. Every man in that room held his breath. Victor Moretti inclined his head a single inch to the left. It was his most significant tell, a micro-expression his men had spent years learning to recognize. Eels, it signified a choice being finalized. Eels, it signified that the next 30 seconds would dictate the fate of every person present. Repeat that, he ordered. She did, the same phrasing, the same uninflected tone, no tremor, no variation in her cadence, a perfect replication. Eels. The harsh scrape of a stool on the polished floor broke the quiet as Frank Caruso rose to his feet. By the wall, a younger operative, Matteo, Eels, 4 years into his service, and who had never witnessed such a direct challenge, let his hand drift to the inside of his coat. Victor raised 2 fingers, his gaze locked on the woman. Both men froze. Victor began to walk toward the bar. Eels. He moved as he always did, unhurried, with a deliberate, even gait, the walk of a man who has never needed to flee. He placed both hands on the bar and leaned in, closing the distance between their faces to 18 inches. Eels. Who is your handler? He asked. No one handles me, Emily replied. That is not a sufficient response. It is the only truthful one I can provide. He performed a rapid analysis of her face, her eyes. Eels. Victor Moretti had survived for 4 decades precisely because he could decipher people. It was the singular talent that saw him through 3 federal inquiries, 2 internal power struggles, and a grave attempt on his life in 2009. Feels. He could sense a lie the way other people sense a change in barometric pressure. It was a low frequency deep in his marrow, a physical notification that something was fundamentally wrong. He did not sense it now. He sensed instead, feels, an impulse so foreign he struggled to classify it. Feels. A complete and profound dissonance. He was not afraid, he stated. It was a fact he was examining, holding a piece of impossible data up to the light. No, she confirmed. Most individuals are afraid of me. I am aware. Feels. And this fact does not seem to register with you. She placed the gleaming glass onto the bar with exacting care. Mr. Moretti, she said, I have already endured the loss of everything I ever feared losing. Feels. You possess very little leverage over a person in my position. Frank Caruso said his name. Victor. A single glance from Victor silenced him. He straightened. He pulled a stool out from under the bar and sat directly across from her. Feels. Assuming the posture of a biologist who has just encountered an inexplicable, fascinating new form of life. Feels. Inform me about the Collins shipment, he said. She observed him for a long moment, then reached beneath the counter, retrieved a clean glass, and poured 2 fingers of bourbon. She slid it across the bar toward him. She poured none for herself. Feels. 47 containers arrived at the Calumet terminal last Tuesday, she started. 46 were processed. The 47th was not. I am aware of these facts. Container 404, she specified. Feels. Something flickered across Victor's features. A tightening around the eyes, a fractional shift of his brow. It was gone as quickly as it came, but she registered it. Container 404 was flagged, she continued. Feels. But the flag was not generated by customs. It was generated from within your own organization. Feels. Someone on your payroll initiated a call, and that container was halted before it could undergo inspection. This shipment did not simply go missing, Mr. Moretti. This shipment was specifically intercepted. Matteo had now closed the distance to the bar. Feels. Frank Caruso remained on his feet. 3 additional men materialized from a back room, deploying to tactical positions with the fluid, silent coordination of a practiced unit. Victor remained perfectly still. Feels. You appear to possess a significant amount of knowledge about my operations, he stated. I possess all knowledge of your operations, she corrected him. It is the reason I am here. And what reason is that? She held his stare. Feels. Because the individual who removed that container from the manifest is preparing to do so again. And the next time, no one will be in a position to stop it. Feels. Frank Caruso moved forward. This conclude, Claire, addressing Victor. Not her. Whatever this performance is, it is over. We ascertain her source of information. And Frank. Victor's voice was barely a whisper. Sit down. Feels. For a brief moment, Frank Caruso seemed poised to object. He did not. He sat. Victor's attention returned to Emily Carter. You stated that an asset inside my organization intercepted container 404, he prompted. Identify them. Feels. I do not have that information yet, she said. Then what precisely is your offer to me? Proof, she answered. I have all of it. The shipping manifests, the wire transfers, the call records. 6 months of accumulated data. Feels. Everything that culminates in the events of last Tuesday. Proof of what, specifically? She maintained his gaze, unblinking. Of the contents of that container, Mr. Moretti, and of every individual who had knowledge of it. Feels. The jazz ensemble continued its set, a slow, somber melody that no one in the room was truly hearing. Victor lifted the bourbon she had poured him. He did not drink. He simply rotated the glass, watching the amber liquid swirl. Feels. Let us proceed under the assumption that you are being truthful, he said. Why present this to me? Why not the federal authorities? Why not the press? Because the Bureau is already compromised, she stated. The words hung in the charged space. Feels. And the media, she continued, lacks the institutional knowledge to comprehend what they would be seeing. Not yet, but I would. Yes. Feels. Because it is my own house. Because your name is appended to every single document, she amended. And because the person manipulating your apparatus is indifferent to your fate when this becomes public. Feels. They are fully prepared for you to absorb the entirety of the consequences, both legal and personal. Victor set the glass down. You are suggesting there is a conspiracy to frame me. I am suggesting the trap has already been constructed, she said. Feels. The only remaining variable is whether you identify its architect before it is sprung. Matteo's hand returned to his coat. This is the trap right now, he interjected. She works for a rival. She is advancing their narrative. Feels. She is not working for anyone. Victor said. You cannot know that with certainty. I am certain, Victor said, his voice level and absolute, because if she were, she would already be dead. Heels. She would have dispatched legal counsel. He stared at her. Is that not the accepted protocol? A faint, nearly imperceptible smile touched Emily Carter's lips. One would assume so, she whispered. The contents of container 404? Heels. Victor insisted. She did not respond immediately. Her eyes dropped to her own hands, and for a fleeting second the stoffa fractured, revealing the immense gravity of the act she had committed. It was a weight heavier and colder than fear. Heels. Children, she said. The word did not make a sound. It created a singularity, a sudden and complete void in the room. Frank Caruso made a guttural noise. Not a word, just pure visceral reaction, and had to turn away. Mateo's hand fell from his coat. Heels. In the back of the room, two of the men exchanged a look, the first unguarded expression of their humanity to appear in ours. Heels. Victor remained motionless, a figure carved from stone suspended in time. The manifest, she said, her voice a scalpel dissecting the thick silence. The numbers, based on container dimensions and the logs, no fewer than 20. Potentially more. Heels. And they were gone, she confirmed, before any alarm was raised. An extraction. Victor pushed himself off the stool. He jerked to the bar's end and faced away, his palms pressed into the dark wood as if seeking an anchor. The jazz trio, Heels. Having concluded one funereal tune, began another, but the notes fell dead in the heavy air. Victor, Frank Caruso whispered, a sound like dry leaves skittering on pavement. Victor didn't move. We don't know that it's legitimate, Victor. Heels. The reply came back, a flat, hard thing. It's real, not an opinion. A law of this new physics. It's real, Frank, he pivoted. His features had shifted, but had found no softness in the transformation. Heels. There was no clemency in Victor Moretti's eyes, only the tectonic shock of a world unmade. A core principle of his universe had been pulverized and reassembled into something monstrous, and it entered through my port, traveled on my shipping line, Heels, was processed by my own people. His gaze was fixed on Evelyn Carter. The corruption is internal. Yes, she affirmed, and you know the name of the betrayer. I have a working hypothesis, he countered. That is not a confirmation. No, she conceded, Heels, but it is where the Inquisition must begin. He moved back toward the bar, re-establishing the same 18 inches of distance, examining her face as if it were a strange and dangerous map. Who are you? He demanded. And do not say Evelyn Carter, Heels. That identity expired with a 58-year-old man from Peoria in 2019. I ran the number 40 minutes ago. Heels. If the accusation registered, she gave no indication. A perfect void. My name is Evelyn Blake, she stated. The very molecules in the room seemed to hold their breath. You are familiar with that name, she said, a declaration, not a query. Heels. You could trace the tension in the hard line of Victor's jaw. Yes, he bit off. Then you understand the purpose of my presence. Evelyn Blake is a ghost file. 20 years cold, Victor countered. Nearly, she replied, but not entirely. Heels. Frank Caruso's complexion had drained to the color of ash. That's impossible. Our intelligence indicated. Your intelligence, Evelyn interrupted, was the narrative you were meant to consume. Her focus never wavered from Victor, Heels, leaving Frank adrift in the fallout. I was declared deceased because I had to cease to exist. Because at 17 I witnessed 3 of your men execute my mother. I was the sole observer. Heels. Victor was a portrait of absolute stillness. I fled, she continued. I constructed identity, a new past, an entirely new person from scratch. And for 2 decades, I inhabited that fiction, convincing myself that survival was its own reward. Heels. She paused. Then last Tuesday, container 404 materialized on a manifest I monitor for other reasons. And when I saw the consignment, when I understood what it held, her voice frayed at the edges. A fracture appeared in her composure. Heels. Something raw and untamed. I concluded that merely being alive was no longer sufficient. The jazz quartet ceased playing. It was impossible to say if they had overheard, or if the sheer density of the moment had finally smothered the sound. Heels. The silence that rushed in was total. Heels. Victor Moretti regarded Evelyn Blake for a long moment. The men, he finally said, the ones who were accountable for your mother's murder. 2 are dead, she answered. The 3rd remains an active member of your syndicate. Victor's head rotated slowly. Heels. A turret finding its target toward Frank Caruso. Frank was studying the floor as if it contained some profound hidden truth. Frank, Victor said. Victor, I swear on my life that container I had no part in. I am not asking about the container. Heels. Victor's voice cut through the excuse. I am asking about a woman, Margaret Blake. 20 years past, a warehouse on the south side. Frank's mouth moved but produced no sound. Feels. Evelyn watched him with the sort of profound patience one can only acquire by replaying a single horrific moment for 2 decades. I was present, Frank confessed. But it wasn't my decision, Victor. The order came from, whose order? Eels. Victor's tone was low and terminal. Eels. It was, Frank faltered. His gaze darted to the entrance, to the silent sentinels posted there. He looked everywhere except at Victor or Evelyn. I am not at liberty, he stammered. Victor, if I speak his name, you will not accept it, Frank pleaded. Eels. And his superior? Victor, we are talking about figures so insulated, so far up the chain, that to even utter their names in this room. Frank Caruso's lips formed a bloodless white steel. His hands trembled. This man, Eels, a 31-year veteran of this life, a survivor of wars both foreign and domestic, was Daniel, he whispered. The room inhaled as one. Daniel Cross, Frank said. He was the one who issued the order. 20 years ago. Eels. And the container last Tuesday, Victor, that was also Daniel. This entire operation, the trafficking, the shipment itself, the false flag. Daniel has been cultivating a malignancy within your enterprise for at least 5 years, perhaps longer, Eels, and he has been doing it with sanction from above. Someone with enough power to guarantee a conspiracy of silence. Victor slowly turned his head, Eels, his eyes sweeping the back of the room before locking on to the man half concealed in the shadows near the exit. Daniel Cross. For 11 years, Victor's most loyal lieutenant. He stood there now, a hand lost inside his jacket, Eels, and the expression on his face was not that of an innocent man being framed. Eels. It was the look of a man hearing the stone slide across the mouth of his own tomb. How long have you been standing there? Victor asked. Daniel Cross offered only silence. Daniel, Victor repeated, remove your hand from your jacket, Eels. Daniel Cross complied, but when his hand emerged, it was not empty. Evelyn Blake did not flee. She didn't so much as blink. She had rehearsed this exact permutation in her mind 1,000 times before ever entering the Meridian. Eels. A truce with this particular possibility had been signed hours before. But Victor Moretti moved, inserting his own body into the space between her and Daniel Cross. It was an act no one in the room anticipated. It seemed to surprise Victor himself. Eels, his body driven by an instinct his conscious mind had not yet ratified. Eels. He stood with his back to Evelyn, his focus locked on Daniel, his own hands open and away from his body. No weapon, no challenge. Merely a man positioned between a firearm and a woman he had no logical reason to protect. Set it down, Victor said. Victor, Eels. Daniel implored. You don't understand what you're shielding. You have no concept of who she is or who sent her. I know precisely who she is, Victor stated, and I know what you are responsible for. And I know about the container. His voice was level, Eels. It always was. This is the final time I will give this instruction. Put the gun down. Daniel Cross looked at the pistol. His eyes darted across the room. 12 men, all witnesses, none moving to intervene, because none of them had understood, Eels, until this exact second, how profoundly Daniel had strayed from the faith. Eels. Even within their brutal world, certain lines existed. And the men in this room, for all their transgressions, adhered to a code. The contents of container 404 had desecrated that code. This will incinerate everything, Daniel warned. Eels. Your entire legacy if this becomes public. It is already public, Evelyn said from behind Victor's shoulder. Daniel's eyes snapped to her. The documentation I spoke of, she went on, is not in a single repository. Eels. I distributed copies to 3 separate secure servers before my arrival. If I fail to make contact by 0600 hours, they are all released to individuals who will understand precisely what to do with them. Daniel Cross lowered the weapon, Eels. Not from a change of heart, but because the fundamental arithmetic had shifted. Even here, at the end of everything, Daniel Cross was a man who respected numbers. Eels. Victor turned to her. 0600 hours, he repeated, the words freighted with consequence. Yes, a 4-hour window. I am aware, she said. The time frame is compressed. She held his gaze without flinching. I am aware of that, she said. Eels. But it is the time we are afforded. Victor Moretti looked at this woman, this specter who had spent 2 decades meticulously erasing herself, only to materialize and dismantle his 23-year empire in a single evening. Eels. Something profound shifted behind his eyes, a look none of his men had ever witnessed. It wasn't remorse, nor was it an apology. It was something more primal. A part of him that had long been dormant, waiting for the one specific call that could awaken it. Eels. Your mother, he said. Margaret Blake. Yes, Evelyn confirmed. I did not sanction that order, he said. I know, she replied, but it was sanctioned in my name. Yes, she said, it was. Heels. A slow, deliberate nod from Victor. He reached for the bourbon she had poured, the one he had left untouched, and consumed it in one seamless final act. With the precision of a watchmaker, he placed the empty glass back on the bar. Proceed, he said. Heels, his voice quiet. Deliver the full report, from its genesis, everything. Evelyn Blake, after 4 hours of standing like a statue, finally slid a stool out from the bar and took a seat. And there in the back room of the Meridian, Heels, as Daniel Cross was held in place by the weight of stares from men who once called him brother, as Frank Caruso contemplated his own hands as if they were alien things, and as 12 other men struggled to reconstruct their world from its ruins, Heels, Evelyn began to speak. Model. Heels. For a long time she spoke, and Victor Moretti simply listened. Here, for the first time in 23 years, was a pure intelligence feed, unfiltered, delivered from a source inside his own sanctum. Heels. It was the most volatile data he had ever been tasked with processing. 40 minutes unfolded, a monologue delivered without a single pause for breath. Not because she needed to. Heels. This was a performance rehearsed in the anonymous solitude of countless hotel rooms, its chilling precision forged in years of silence. She understood the sequence, the exact dosage of truth required at each juncture. Information, she had learned, Heels, was the one currency that never depreciates. And so Victor listened as he always did, without interruption, without a flicker of emotion. Nothing she could use to gain a reading. He was a void, absorbing the architecture of a new reality. Heels. Vittorio held his position, elbows anchored to the bar, his gaze locked on her as the data washed over him. In his orbit, the other men were merely ghosts, held in a state of suspended animation. No one was dismissed. No one would dare to leave. Heels. Even Daniel Cross, framed against the wall between his men Matteo and Garrett, remained transfixed. He posed no physical threat. The woman Evelyn had ensured this long before stepping through the door. The dossiers she'd sent ahead were not a bluff. Heels. She was never so careless. Instead, she unspooled the evidence, each piece a damning revelation. It began with a single thread, a shipping container, flagged 8 months ago for a counterfeit manifest, followed by the wire transfers. Heels. Masked as logistical payments, all bearing the correct codes and industry jargon. Heels. There was nothing to alert anyone who wasn't already searching for a body. She then produced the call logs, sourced from a contact she deliberately left unnamed, linking a burner phone to a prepaid line. That line was registered to a shell company which, Heels, after 4 layers of misdirection, led to a man named Gerald Stokes. Vittorio's expression remained a mask of granite when he heard the name, but his body betrayed the performance. His right hand, which had been resting on the bar, coiled into a fist. Heels. Does that name signify anything to you? She inquired. I know the name, he confirmed. Then you know he is not. I know precisely what he is, Vittorio interjected. He is a sitting United States Senator from Illinois. Heels. He has occupied that seat for 16 years. Officially, he chairs the subcommittee on interstate commerce and transportation. A beat of silence followed, thick and suffocating. He was a guest at my daughter's wedding. Heels. The pressure in the room shifted, becoming something tangible and sharp. A small, strangled noise escaped Frank Caruso. He attended your daughter's wedding, Evelyn reiterated, her voice perfectly level, and for a minimum of 2 years, Heels. He has utilized your shipping network to transport children across state lines. Utilized my network? Vittorio countered. Or utilized my name? Both, she replied. But you were unaware. Vittorio scrutinized her. Heels. His stare sharp enough to cut steel. How certain are you of that assessment? 100%, she said, because if you were aware, this conversation would not be happening. It wasn't praise. It was a clinical diagnosis, Heels, and he accepted it as such. Heels. Show me the logs, he commanded. From her jacket, she produced a folded envelope and placed it on the bar. Vittorio took it. He opened it. His face was a closed book as he read, turning each page with a deliberate, almost excruciating slowness. Heels. His eyes darting back twice to re-examine specific lines. The room had fallen dead silent. The jazz band had packed up long ago, leaving no music to mask the sound of a world fracturing. Vittorio slid the documents back into the envelope. The burner phone, Heels, he began, the one that connects to Stokes' shell company. Yes. Its last call was made 4 days ago. Correct. To Daniel Cross. From across the room, Daniel's voice cracked the silence. Vittorio, don't. Heels. He didn't elevate his voice. His gaze was fixed on Daniel, but his words were directed at the polished surface of the bar. Do not speak, Daniel. I require approximately 60 seconds to finalize a decision, and if you utter one more word, Heels, I will make one that neither of us can rescind. Daniel Cross remained silent. 60 seconds elapsed. Evelyn felt herself counting everyone. Then Vittorio raised his head, met Daniel's gaze from across the room, and said, 4 days ago, Heels. I can explain, Daniel pleaded. You have been trafficking children through my port for 2 years, Vittorio stated, each word landing like a hammer blow, using my people, my documents, my influence. And 4 days ago, Heels, you were still in communication with the man orchestrating the entire operation. Heels, it isn't that simple. The money, Vittorio asked. Daniel's eyes did that slow, telltale blink of a cornered man. What? How much did he pay you? The silence that followed was a confession in itself. Heels. Every man in that room understood that any number Daniel Cross now uttered would be the wrong one. 2 million, Daniel finally whispered. Vittorio nodded. It wasn't a nod of understanding, Heels. It was the gesture of a man etching a permanent to his memory where it would reside forever. Matteo, Vittorio said. Sir, take him to the back. Daniel attempted a single step forward, but Garrett's hand shot out, Heels, clamping onto his arm, halting him cold. He looked at Vittorio with an expression of pure, unvarnished desperation. Heels. Vittorio, you don't grasp what you're facing. Stokes isn't just one man. You're chasing a phantom network. Judges, district attorneys, city hall. He's buried beneath so many layers of protection, you will never reach the bottom. Heels. If you pursue him with what she possesses, he motioned his head toward Evelyn, they will bury you. They will bury her. They will incinerate everything you have ever built. That is a probable outcome, Vittorio conceded. Daniel could only stare, Heels, the last of his frantic calculations dissolving into nothing. Take him to the back, Vittorio repeated. This time, Matteo and Garrett acted, and Daniel Cross, the man who had been Vittorio Moretti's right hand for 11 years, Heels, while spending the last 2 of them betraying everything that hand had ever touched, was gone. Heels. Silence descended once more. Then Frank Caruso spoke. Proceed. 20 years ago, and Frank's was trembling but lucid. The warehouse, Margaret Blake. He paused, Heels, as if assessing how much of the poison could be spoken aloud. Daniel initiated it, but I was there, and I did nothing. I've carried that. He halted again. Evelyn observed him, her face a blank canvas. I have carried that for 20 years, Heels. Frank concluded. I am not requesting anything from either of you. I am simply stating a fact. Evelyn asked, how old was I? Frank looked directly at her. 17. My mother? 41, Frank said, his voice a ghost. Heels, reciting a file memorized against his will. Heels. Did she say anything? Evelyn asked. At the end? The question seemed to inflict a physical pain upon Frank. She said your name, he replied. She said it twice. Evelyn's gaze dropped to the bar. There were no tears. Heels. That part of her had been cauterized years ago in empty rooms, where she learned that grief is not a storm to be weathered, but a climate in which one learns to breathe. Tonight, she was breathing. She had to. Acknowledged, she stated. I'm sorry, Heels. Frank whispered. I know. I said acknowledged, Frank, she returned, her voice toneless. Not forgiven. Not forgotten. Acknowledged. The information has been processed. Vittorio had observed the entire exchange, his expression unreadable. Heels. He looked at Evelyn now. What do you require from me? Access to your true ledgers, she said without hesitating. The ones you maintain personally, not the records Daniel was permitted to see. Heels. I need to map every contact point Stokes exploited within your operation. Every driver, every manager, every agent on the docks. I need the complete schematic of the infection. And then what? Then? Heels. We deliver this intelligence to someone who can utilize it, she said. Not the Bureau. As I said, they are compromised. But I know a federal prosecutor, Hartman. Heels. He has been attempting to build a case against Stokes for 3 years with nothing but fragments. My intel combined with yours. You want me to collaborate with a federal prosecutor? Vittorio asked. Heels. I need you to survive what is coming, she countered, her voice low. Working with Hartman is the only path to your survival. His words were rough, like grinding stone. You want me to expose 23 years of my life's work to a federal prosecutor, Heels, and hope he only seizes the pieces that will bury Stokes. Yes, she breathed. That is a descent into madness. The alternative, she said, the words cutting through the silence, is Stokes putting you in the ground before you can do the same to him, Heels. He knows the container was compromised. He knows the records are missing. He will soon know something happened to Daniel tonight, and when he follows that thread, your name is the first sacrifice he will offer to whichever agency investigates. Feels. Vittorio's gaze fell to the empty glass in his hand. He will give me up, Vittorio said, the realization settling like a dead weight in his throat. Feels. This was not a question, but a eulogy for a future that no longer existed. He will deliver you to the FBI on a gilded tray before the week concludes, she affirmed. By then, your leverage will have evaporated, but in this moment, you possess the files. Feels. You possess Daniel, and you possess me. It is enough to approach Hartman and author your own conclusion, rather than let Stokes dictate the terms of your demise. A profound, leaden silence filled the space between them. From the periphery of the light, Feels. Frank Caruso's voice emerged. The woman has a point, Vittorio. I'm aware of how good her point is, Vittorio retorted, his voice taut with strain. That's what makes this so repellent. He pushed away from the bar, presenting his back to them. Feels. Facing the monolithic darkness of the window, his hands locked behind him as if bound by invisible manacles. Evelyn observed the rigid set of his shoulders. Feels. She had long mastered the art of reading men in their quietude, in the minute, unconscious betrayals of the body when it presumes it is unobserved. The tension in Vittorio's frame was a silent declaration of war, a war being fought entirely within himself. Feels. My father built this syndicate, he began, his words directed at his own reflection, at the sprawling city beyond. From nothing. 40 years, he held it for 20, I've held it for 23. We accepted losses, we made decisions that... Feels. The words withered, the confession left unspoken. Some I regret, others I would make again. But a line existed, a sacred one. Children. Feels. His voice did not break. Men like Vittorio Moretti do not allow their composure to fracture for an audience. But its very timbre altered, a subtle modulation in tone, like a wire stretched to its absolute limit. Feels. There was always a goddamn line. I am aware, Evelyn answered softly. Stokes desecrated my line, Vittorio declared, each word steeped in venomous fury. He leveraged the entirety of my life's work to transgress the one boundary I would never, Feels, ever approach. I know. Vittorio pivoted from the window, his features a mask of grim resolution. Fine, he conceded. What is the timeline? 6 a.m. triggers the dead man's switch. The data packets go public then, regardless, she informed him. Feels. I would prefer to have Hartman aligned with us before that occurs. Vittorio's gaze shifted to Frank. You possess his private number. A trace of confusion crossed Frank's face. Hartman, why would I possibly have? Because 3 years ago, Feels, you attempted to negotiate your own arrangement with him. I instructed you to stand down, and you obeyed. But you retain the number, Vittorio stated, his certainty absolute. I understand your nature, Frank. 40 years. You kept it. Feels. As if compelled by a will not his own, Frank's hand moved to his pocket, retrieving his phone. Feels. Locate it, Vittorio commanded. As Frank's thumbs danced over the screen, Evelyn watched Vittorio transform. He became a phantom in his own domain, a current of silent motion flowing between his men. Feels. Issuing low-frequency instructions she could not discern, a comprehensive tactical reset that would require another organization days to execute. Accomplished in mere seconds. Victor Moretti was a creature of prey, Feels, and such creatures never permit themselves the luxury of slowness. In the world he governed, slowness is a death warrant. Her own mind spooled backward. A memory surfaced. A frigid warehouse on Chicago's South Side, 2 decades past. Feels. A 17-year-old girl sprinting through a shadowed alley, carrying only the clothes she wore and a single worn photograph. Feels. Then came the long years of burying that girl beneath strata of false identities, of credentials earned in the deep of night, the meticulous construction of a specter who could enter this very room to orchestrate this final gambit. Feels. The position and unassuming analyst role at a shipping conglomerate was the key that unlocked the kingdom, the databases that charted the arteries of global commerce. So many years of observation, of patience, Feels, of tempering her will for the exact moment the machinery would finally align. In no calculation, in no possible scenario, had she ever accounted for Victor Moretti stepping in front of a bullet for her. That singular, Feels, human variable had never factored into her code, and she had yet to process its implications. Found it, Frank declared, offering his phone. Victor returned to the bar. He accepted the device, Feels, his eyes burning into the digits on the screen before lifting to meet Evelyn's. You said Hartman was clean. As clean as any man can be while navigating a sewer, she countered. That is hardly a resounding vote of confidence, Feels. It is the most honest one I am capable of giving. Heels. A phantom smile flickered at the edge of Victor's mouth, but it never fully materialized. Clear the room, he commanded, his voice echoing in the abrupt stillness, his stare fixed on Evelyn. Frank hesitated. Attend to Mateo and Daniel. Heels. Ensure that fire is extinguished. Everyone else, vanish. The room emptied with the silent, conditioned discipline of men inured to sudden tempests. In their absence, the space became cavernous, a cathedral of shadow and silence. Heels. Victor placed Frank's phone on the polished bar. Before I initiate this call, he said, his voice low, there is one more thing I require. May I? He leaned in slightly. The 2 decades you dedicated to this, he said. The files, the network, Heels, your methods for infiltrating those systems. None of it was without cost. It would demand a fortune, a considerable one. He held her gaze, a silent refusal to let her look away. Heels. Who was your patron, Evelyn? She had anticipated the question. This was not idle curiosity. It was a critical variable in his calculus of survival. Hartman, she answered, without flinching. Victor's expression was stone. Heels. He has been financing my operation for the last 3 years, she elaborated. Completely off-ledger, mostly with his own fund. He was unable to reach Stokes through official avenues. Stokes holds too much influence at the DOJ. Heels. So he located me, or I located him. The narrative shifts with the teller, and we have been assembling the case piece by piece. Which implies Hartman already possesses everything you have shown me, Victor surmised. Heels, the gears of his mind audibly clicking. He possesses what I have permitted him to possess. Heels. Which is the majority of it, she conceded. But he lacks you. He lacks Danny Echevarria. He lacks the internal shipping manifests that prove Stokes was exploiting your entire operation, your established routes. Without them, his case is compromised. Heels. It is formidable, but not airtight. With them, she allowed the implication to hang in the air. With them he can entomb him, Victor finished for her. With them he can burn all of them to the ground, she corrected. Heels. Stokes and his entire shadow apparatus. Stokes is merely the gatekeeper for all the others who have been using your enterprise. The entire damn machine. Victor stared at the phone. You did not just come here tonight to issue a warning, he said. Heels, his words precise and deliberate. That is correct, she confirmed. You came here to turn me. I came here to present you with a choice. Heels. The choice, she said, her voice a near whisper, between being the pawn sacrificed by a machine that exploited you without your knowledge, or being the man who ignites the entire board. Victor reached out and took the phone. Heels. Is Hartman anticipating this call? He is aware of the possibility. And his instructions? Her eyes locked onto his. If Victor Moretti ever dials this number, you are to answer before the second ring. Victor Moretti pressed the screen. Heels. A single, sharp ring pierced the silence. Then a voice, alert and clear, the voice of a man who had waited by a phone for years for a call he never truly expected to receive. This is Hartman. Victor looked at Evelyn, and in that shared glance, Heels. An understanding passed between them. It was not trust, nor was it friendship. It was the stark recognition of 2 souls who had just stepped off a precipice together, into a void from which there could be no retreat. Heels. This is Victor Moretti, Victor said. I believe you have been searching for me. A beat of silence. Mr. Moretti, Hartman's voice responded, I have been searching for you for 3 years. Well, Victor declared, you have found me. Heels. He took the bourbon glass, still vacant, and rotated it once in his hand. We must discuss Gerald Stokes, and it must happen tonight. Hartman's reply was immediate. I will be there in 1 hour. Victor terminated the call. He set the phone on the bar. Heels. He placed the empty glass beside it. The night was far from over. Somewhere out there, Stokes was orchestrating his own moves, while in a hidden room, Daniel Cross was a ticking bomb of intelligence. And in 3 separate concealed locations, Heels, the data lay in wait for the 6 a.m. sunrise to spill out into the world. Heels. A sunrise none of them could allow, and yet, for the first time since Evelyn Blake had crossed his threshold 6 hours prior, a new element had entered the room. It was minute, fragile, a promise that offered nothing, but it was present. Heels. Victor Moretti studied the woman who had spent 2 decades becoming a ghost, all to enter the lion's den and present its king with the agonizing truth. His voice was almost imperceptible. Your mother would have been proud of you. Heels. Evelyn's gaze became sharp. Do not. I know, he said gently. I know. And he did. Some wounds are too profound for language, a truth they had both learned through the harshest of lessons. So rather than speak again, Heels. Victor Moretti reached beneath the bar, produced a second clean glass, poured 2 measures of bourbon, and slid one across the polished surface to her. This time, she reached out to accept it. Heels. There was no toast. No victory had yet been won. They sat in the resonant silence of the club, phantoms presiding over their own wake, the gravity of the approaching hour compressing the very air around them. Heels. They were waiting for a federal prosecutor to enter and dismantle the world they knew. In a back room, the architecture of Daniel Cross's future was imploding, the exit strategy he relied upon having dissolved an hour before. Heels. And 14 blocks to the north, in an office tower that scraped the clouds, Gerald Stokes stared at his phone, at a final message from a now-silent number. Heels, and felt a forgotten toxin enter his bloodstream for the first time in 16 years of absolute dominion. Heels. Anxiety arrives ahead of schedule. Hartman appeared in 53 minutes, not the allotted hour, a profane disruption to the ceremony of the wait. Evelyn registered the knock first, a single report fractured into a nervous three-beat rhythm. Heels. It was the sound of a man performing composure and failing. A nearly imperceptible nod passed from Victor to the sentinel guarding the door. James Hartman then entered the Meridian. He was armed with a leather briefcase. Heels. It surfaced a map of past conflicts, and his face was a sculpture of caffeine and carefully suppressed terror. He was younger than his reputation, mid-40s perhaps, and thin, framed by wire-rimmed glasses. Heels. His gray suit had the memory of expense but now radiated only exhaustion. He stopped, his gaze absorbing the orchestrated emptiness, the vacant tables, the mute stage, and the men positioned like instruments of quiet force. He betrayed no reaction. Heels. Evelyn logged the detail with the detached admiration of a grandmaster. His gaze met hers before any other. "You made it," he managed, his voice a filament of sound. "I made it," she returned. His eyes then shifted to Victor Moretti. Heels. Whatever psychological armor Hartman had donned, whatever dialogue he had rehearsed, it sublimated into nothing before the rare presence of the man before him. For 3 heartbeats, the air in the room became solid. Finally, Mr. Moretti. "Counselor." Heels. Victor's voice was the grind of stone on steel. "One thing must be absolutely clear before we start," Hartman declared, setting his briefcase on the table as if it were a parapet. "Any agreement reached in this room must be viable in daylight." Heels. "I refuse to broker deals I cannot justify to my supervisor at 7 a.m. Heels. "Your supervisor is unaware you are here," Victor observed. It was a statement of fact, not an inquiry. Hartman offered no denial. "My supervisor will receive a full report by sunrise," he countered. "But the architecture of the agreement is built here. Heels, by us. It is critical that you accept that." "I accept that," Victor replied. "Sit." Hartman sat. Victor occupied the chair across from him. Evelyn held her position at the bar, a silent observer positioned just at the edge of hearing. Heels. The historian to a tragedy she had meticulously engineered over 3 years. She would not hurry its conclusion. "Daniel Cross is in the rear," Victor stated, his tone flat. A subtle tremor passed behind Hartman's eyes. "Is he cooperative?" Heels. "He is calculating the value of his own life." Heels. At this moment, Victor clarified, he is debating whether telling you everything he knows about Stokes is a preferable outcome to what Stokes will do to him for betraying him. He has yet to reach a conclusion. "I can assist with his calculus." Heels. Hartman proposed. "Of that I have no doubt." Victor leaned in, the entire room seeming to collapse into the space between them. "But before you speak with Daniel, you and I will discuss what I am willing to give you and what I am not." Heels. Hartman produced a yellow legal pad and pen from his briefcase. The click of the pen was the only sound in the room, a starter pistol for a race to damnation. "Proceed." "I will give you Stokes," Victor began, gift-wrapped. "The phantom corporations." Heels. "The wire logs, the shipping manifests. I will give you every man in my employ that he has ever corrupted. Every last driver, dock foreman, and compromised official." Heels. The proposal was a blood offering, placed squarely on the table. It was followed without pause by the cost. "My organization," Victor said, his voice lowering, each syllable a block of granite being set into a wall. Heels. "What I have created remains untouched." It was a statement of pure sovereign will. This was no mere business, but an extension of his own identity. As Hartman's thoughts scrambled to contain this impossible condition, Victor cut through the quiet. Heels. "I have not finished." He proceeded to systematically dismantle the prosecutor's case, painting it as a weak construction of inference. Heels. A circumstantial illusion that Stokes's attorneys would obliterate in under an hour. A deliberate assault on the foundation of Hartman's professional confidence. Heels. "Total immunity," Hartman whispered the phrase, as if speaking a sacrilege. for a 23-year criminal history. Victor immediately reframed the proposition, moving it from the realm of law into the realm of destiny. Deals. He constructed a new paradigm, a choice between two irreconcilable futures. Stokes with nothing, or Stokes with the arsenal I provide, on terms I can abide. The focus was shifted to his own moral capacity, his endurance. He invoked his age, Deals. 61, not as a point of vulnerability, but as a testament to his own permanence, contrasting his existence with the transient nature of careers like Hartman's. He concluded by rejecting the very idea of a negotiation, Deals, of bartering over the cost for a man he knew, and they both knew, was completely untouchable without his aid. Hartman's eyes fled to Evelyn, looking for some kind of signal. Deals. She was a study in stillness, specter at the summit. Her function was only to unlock the door to this moment, not to bless the covenants made within it. Hartman, finding no purchase there, attempted to reclaim a piece of the game. Deals. He countered with partial immunity, attempting to draw careful boundaries around certain crimes, certain timelines. An amnesty with conditions. Victor's response was the quiet sound of a blade being unsheathed, defined specific, Deals. So Hartman detailed his offer. The trafficking, Container 404, the entirety of the Stokes enterprise, all of it to be erased, forgotten, in return for his absolute cooperation. Victor's other life, Deals, that long history composed of violence and secrets, would be a matter for another time. Deals. Victor recognized the veiled threat instantly. You're keeping a weapon for a later date. Hartman attempted to conceal the gambit with a show of sincerity, a last-ditch effort to manufacture trust in the contaminated atmosphere. Deals. He conceded that a blanket amnesty for a criminal career dating back to 1991 was untenable, a political reality he knew Victor already grasped. His offer, then, was a firewall for the Stokes operation, Deals, a documented history of assistance, and his personal guarantee to advocate for leniency down the road. At that moment, Frank Caruso re-entered the room. A nearly invisible nod was exchanged between him and Victor, a silent, pre-planned confirmation. Deals. The strategy was intact. Victor shifted tactics. Testimony will make the case indefensible. With yours, Hartman countered, and your evidence, it makes it absolute. Deals. The bargaining was complete. Victor was now issuing directives. This is what happens next. He instructed Hartman to go and secure Daniel's statement while he went to acquire the true leverage, something superior to call logs. Deals. The prosecutor's pen hovered over the legal pad. Superior in what way? Victor's eyes found Evelyn, a silent query. He was verifying the official narrative, the one they had both constructed. Deals. She confirmed the initial flagged shipment had been 26 months prior. There is a safe, Victor told Hartman, its location a secret he would retain as his final piece of leverage. Inside that safe, he elaborated, were ledgers. Deals, 11 years of them. Every transaction, every name, every secret alliance his enterprise had ever forged. Deals. He first termed it insurance, but then unveiled the grimmer axiom of his authority. In this world, he said, his voice a cold current, you collect things that frighten people, because frightened people remain inert. Deals. He allowed the philosophy to saturate the room. Stokes is in those ledgers, dating back far longer than 26 months. The pen dropped from Hartman's hand. How much longer? Hartman asked, his voice thin with implication. Long enough? Deals. Victor replied, to change the entire narrative. A sharp, invasive cold moved through Evelyn. She fixed her stare on Victor, her voice taut, fragile. How far? His eyes were deliberate, heavy. Deals. The look of a man gauging whether a person could withstand the weight of the truth. Stokes did not begin with the containers, Victor said quietly. Deals. The genesis of the sin was small, cloaked in the mundane. Zoning exemptions, liquor permits, the ordinary sort of graft that conceals a deeper decay. The first contract I have documented is from 14 years ago. Deals. The numbers fell into the room like dirt on a casket lid. Evelyn's breath hitched. What was the contract for? A warehouse, Victor answered. Southside, Orion. 14 years. 2 years before the death of her mother. Deals. The very air seemed to become brittle. Stokes, Victor clarified, had been a phantom, the ownership buried beneath 4 layers of shell companies. Victor's men had merely rented the space for logistics, oblivious to the true identity of their landlord. Deals. He had only ever conducted business through an intermediary. Stokes himself remained in the shadows for years. But the ledger, Victor assured him, documented the chain of title directly to the source. He was tied to that place, Evelyn stated. Deals, the words like poison on her tongue. Yes, before my mother was killed. Yes. The silence that descended was a profound abyss. Neither man spoke, neither dared to trespass upon the sacred and violent territory of her dawning comprehension. Eels. An entire reality was fracturing. You were unaware, she said finally. It was not a question. It was a desperate need for a single fact to hold true. I was unaware, Victor confirmed. Eels. His voice laden with the knowledge that his own ignorance was irrelevant. But she needed to hear the words from him right now, before the ledgers revealed that truth to the world. Eels. That truth was a bomb, set to detonate in the public square once Hartman officially moved against Stokes. But Victor refused to let Evelyn absorb the blast from the cold, sterile language of a legal filing. Eels. A rigid line forms on Evelyn's mouth, the physical artifact of a scream swallowed whole. 14 years, 2 years before her mother's murder, Stokes was already a fixture in that world, enmeshed with the place, the players, Eels, and the very sequence of transgressions her mother had obviously uncovered. The entire architecture of her grief begins to fracture, reassembling itself into a different, sharper shape. My mother, she utters, her voice an echo. It was never random. Eels. No, Victor's voice is a quiet confirmation in the room. I'm convinced it was not. She was hunting Stokes, and Victor's silence serves as his confession. Eels. Hartman, ever the strategist, puts a legal lens on the tragedy. If her mother was investigating Stokes 14 years prior, the fundamental calculus of the entire conflict has shifted. Eels. And with that, the ground gives way. Her mother's death is no longer an island of random horror, but is suddenly revealed as a peninsula, potentially connected to the same dark network we are prosecuting tonight. The crime metastasizes, Eels, bleeding from human trafficking into federal murder, a murder whose threads now climb all the way to a United States senator. It's a psychological shockwave, and Evelyn's body responds first. She pushes off the stool, Eels, a physical recoil from a truth too large to mentally process. She turns away from them, a small, desperate gesture to reclaim her own oxygen. Her life's work, a 20-year fortress of logic, had a contingency for everything but this one thing, Eels. The very bedrock of her existence was a simple, stark belief. Her mother died by chance, a victim of wrong place, wrong time. Eels. This new paradigm, that her mother was hunting the same beast, walking this very same path, is a reality too seismic to absorb in a single moment. How sure are you? The question is directed at the wall. She cannot look at them. The ledger is what it is. Eels. Victor states, a delivery of fact, not solace. When she turns back, the fragility is gone, sealed behind a mask of cold iron. You can witness the psychological machinery clicking into place. Compartmentalization. Eels. She takes the white-hot agony of this new revelation, forces it into a box, and slams the lid. There will be a time for grief later, when the objective is secure. Get Daniel, she tells Victor, her voice pure steel. Bring him in here now. Eels. Victor nods, and Frank slips from the room. The only sound is the manic scrape of Hartman's pen on paper. The sound of a man who understands this interview will forge the remainder of his career. Then Daniel Cross enters, Mateo beside him. Eels. The calculated poise he wore an hour before has disintegrated into something that looks chillingly like fear. Fear is useful. It is the sound of a mind's fortification starting to crack. His eyes lock on Hartman. You're James Hartman, he says. Eels, almost a whisper. Assistant U.S. Attorney, Hartman replies, not looking up. Sit down, Mr. Cross. Daniel's gaze snaps to Victor, terror and disbelief fighting for control. You actually went through with it. Sit down, Daniel, Victor repeats. Eels, his tone leaving no space for debate. A chair scrapes against the floor, and Hartman begins his methodical dissection of a man's life. Eels. I have records linking you directly to Gerald Stokes' trafficking network. He arranges the evidence like cards in a damning tarot spread. Untraceable phones, a shell corporation, doctored manifests for 3 different shipments, Eels, and an informant who places him at the nexus of the operation for 24 months. Daniel's attention wanders, then fixes on Evelyn. A peculiar spark in his eyes. It's not just recognition, Eels. It's a deeper connection being forged in the wreckage of his world. Who are you, he asks. He's not just asking a person, he's challenging the architect of his ruin. It doesn't matter who I am, she answers, her voice a flat line, Eels, refusing him the single piece of data his ego needs to make sense of his collapse. It matters to me, he pushes, the wounded narcissism undisguised, the sheer offense of being undone by a ghost who has erased 2 years of his work. He stops. Eels. A sickening realization dawns. Daniel isn't just an analyst who got in too deep. Stokes, he says, and the name alone seems to pull all the heat from the room. Stokes knows about you. The air crackles. The entire dynamic shifts, feels. Victor's voice is a sharp edge. What did you say? Daniel lays it all out. 4 days prior, a call from Stokes, but not about logistics. It was about internal database queries into his companies, flagged by a source inside, feels. Stokes was hunting the person digging around in his empire. Daniel played ignorant, but a slight panicked hesitation. He said he was going to find out who it was. A muscle twitches in Evelyn's jaw. When was this call? 4 days. An eternity, feels. 4 days, she echoes, the words tasting of ash, which means he's had 4 days to trace that search back to my firm. Feels. Possibly, Daniel says, a hollow clinical offering. Not possibly, she shoots back, her strategic mind already moving 3 plays ahead. If he has an IT asset on the inside, he can get a name in 48 hours max. Her eyes cut to Hartman, feels, a non-verbal communication of the escalating peril. He knows who I am. Hartman vocalizes the terrifying conclusion. Then he knows you're here. Evelyn maps out the new state of play. He has my professional identity. Maybe not my name, feels, but the consultancy. He knows my place of work, which means her train of thought violently derailed by the vibration of a phone on the table. Unknown number. For one beat, she flinches, then resolve crystallizes. She answers, feels. A voice on the other end speaks her name, Messrs. Blake. Her body reacts with the cold paralysis of true terror. It's the voice of Gerald Stokes, a man who has ruled his world with absolute authority for decades. Smooth, unhurried, feels. The voice of a predator that has never needed to roar, feels. Senator, she responds, the title an involuntary reflex from a former life. In that moment, the room holds its breath, a herd of antelope frozen by the scent of a lion. Victor crosses the room in 4 silent, measured strides, feels, positioning himself beside her, a human shield. She presses the speakerphone button without prompting. The voice begins its assault with praise. I want to compliment you. He references her 2 decades of work, feels, then twists the knife by mentioning her mother. A surgical psychological blow. She was a persistent woman. Evelyn meets the attack with silence. I understand you have quite a gathering there tonight, Stokes says, signaling his omniscience, feels. I'm sure Mr. Moretti is present. Perhaps Mr. Hartman too, if I'm not mistaken. A calculated pause. Am I mistaken, James? Hartman's face is a granite mask. You're not, he confirms. Good, the voice says. Feels. Then I will say this to all of you, and we can dispense with the formalities. The voice reveals the contours of its trap. What you have, the documents, the financial records, it is quite impressive. I mean that, feels. It is also entirely and completely worthless. Hartman's voice is strained, explain, and Stokes turns over his final card. 2 hours ago, a federal judge, when he casually notes he has known for 21 years, signed an order, feels. The order places the Calumet shipping terminal under an official national security review. With that single signature, 36 months of transit records are now classified. Every manifest, every logbook, feels. Every single dollar is now sealed inside a federal tomb that not even Hartman has the authority to open, feels. The blood drains from Hartman's face, a physical manifestation of strategic annihilation. The documents Evelyn spent years uncovering, Stokes elaborates, relishing every syllable, came almost exclusively from that terminal's data, feels. Which means her evidence is now classified state material, or it was obtained in a manner that renders it inadmissible in any court. He allows the weight of that to settle. I truly do admire the artistry, feels, but you brought a knife to a war I've been fighting with a cannon for the last 6 months. A heavy final silence falls over the room, and then Victor speaks, his voice cutting through the atmosphere of absolute defeat. You made a mistake, Gerald, feels. Using his first name is a challenge, an immediate and deliberate reframing of power. Did I? Stokes purrs, feels. The ledger, Victor says. You think you know its location. You are wrong. He reveals his own countermove. The safe that Stokes has had under surveillance for the past 18 months, the linchpin of his entire counterintelligence effort, feels, has been empty for the last 8. Because I moved everything, Victor states, his voice low and cold, the same week you attended my daughter's wedding and shook my hand. The words are crafted to inflict the most personal wound imaginable, feels. Another pause stretches across the line, but this one has a different texture. It is the sound of profound shock. You knew, Stokes says. It isn't a question. I suspected, Victor clarifies. I didn't know about the children, feels, but I knew you were corrupt, and I knew that eventually you would need to tidy up loose ends, feels. I just ensured I wasn't the loose end you believed you were holding. Where is it? Stokes demands, his voice raw with sudden vulnerability. The ledger, Victor says, delivering the fatal stroke. feels, is in a location that has no connection whatsoever to the Calumet terminal. The national security order is now just an expensive piece of paper, which means Hartman can have it in his possession by 8 a.m., feels, with a chain of custody that is completely clean. The line is dead silent. "You're bluffing," Stokes finally rasps. "Gerald," Victor replies, his tone now almost analytical. "In the 40 years you have known me, have you ever seen me bluff?" Feels. A final silence. This one feels different. It is the sound of a god discovering his own mortality, of a puppeteer looking down to find that all of his strings have been severed. Feels. "This isn't finished," Stokes's voice insists, a phantom of authority rattling through the speaker. "It is," Evelyn answers, her tone not one of triumph, but the hollow resonance after a long war, a deep weariness that has burned her clean of all emotion. Feels. "It was finished when I walked into this room. You just weren't aware of it yet." The line clicks dead. A thick, suffocating silence fills the void. Hartman is the one who breaks it, his voice a hammer of cold realism. Feels. That national security order is real. Their primary weapon, the evidence, is now compromised. "It's going to be a challenge," Victor corrects him, fundamentally reshaping the perception of their predicament to preserve the will to fight. "Not a problem," Feels. "There is a difference." Feels. His eyes land on Evelyn. "The ledger, Hartman needs it tonight." Her response is sharp, stripped of all preamble. "How long?" 90 minutes, he says. "Then we have 90 minutes. With that, the bargain is struck." Feels. But it is Daniel Cross who breaks the fragile veneer of control, his practiced professionalism shattering to expose the raw nerve of terror beneath. "He won't use the courts," he says, his voice a tremor. "He'll come for us. For all of us." Feels. Victor's reply is laced with ice. "Let him," Daniel's voice shrinks. "Victor, it's a child's plea in a killer's world." In Victor's gaze there is no pity, no rage, only the cold. Feels. Dispassionate appraisal of a predator, determining if a tool has outlived its purpose. Whatever history they shared has been incinerated, leaving only the grim arithmetic of the present. Feels. "You have one useful act left in you." Victor's words are clinical, a final transaction laid bare. "You know Stokes' entire network. Put it on paper. This isn't a path to redemption." Feels. "It's an offer of utility. A chance to extract one last piece of clean intelligence from a compromised asset. You do that for us tonight, and you give Hartman a weapon." Daniel's gaze flits between the blank legal pad and the shadowed exits. Feels. His mind locked in the primal calculus of fight or flight. "And if I do," he whispers, "what about me?" "You might live through this," Victor states flatly. "That's more than you deserve, and probably more than you'll get if Stokes finds you. Start writing." Feels. In the silence that follows, Daniel Cross reaches for the pen. Feels. Hartman pulls his chair closer, carving a small pocket of industry from the suffocating tension. An unlikely tableau emerges in the dim light. The federal prosecutor and the career criminal, heads bowed over the genesis of a confession. Feels. Tracing the architecture of a 16-year conspiracy drawn from the threat of a violent end. Evelyn watches them for a moment. Then she turns, creating a deliberate perimeter of isolation for herself at a vacant table. Feels. Her phone screen casts a cold glow on her face as she types a series of short encrypted messages, digital whispers to 3 separate ghosts, each holding a key to the archives of her life's work. To an observer, the text would be meaningless static. Feels. Once the task is done, she sets the phone down. She grants herself precisely 1 minute, a controlled 60-second dive into the wreckage of the past 5 hours. The images cascade behind her eyes, the culmination of a 20-year plan. Feels. Daniel's world-altering revelation about her mother, the face-to-face clash with Stokes, and the savage, unforeseen intervention of Victor Moretti. 60 seconds. Then she severs the emotional connection. She is operational once more. Feels. She retrieves her phone to reach out to a crucial piece of her network. The source inside the shipping consultancy who provided the access, the one who remains ignorant of the night's bloody turn. Feels. The phone rings 4 times, each pulling at her composure, before being swallowed by the digital abyss of voicemail. A feedback loop of pure dread ignites in her gut. She tries again. The result is identical. In a single fluid movement, Feels. She rises and approaches Victor, who stands observing the debriefing. She puts a hand on his arm. When he turns, his expression confirms he has already diagnosed the catastrophe written on her face. "What?" he says. "It isn't a question. My contact," Feels, she explains, her voice a low thrum of alarm. The asset inside she's not picking up. Victor's entire posture changes, the air around him becoming charged. "Last contact? 6 hours ago," she replies. "Before I arrived. Stokes." Feels. Victor breathes the name like a final judgment. He had 4 days to follow the search, she reasons aloud. If he found the databases, he found the source. Feels. If he reached the source, the rest of the thought is strangled in her throat, choked by the implications. Victor speaks a name into the stillness. Frank. A figure detaches from the room's deep shadows. I need a team at an address, Victor orders. Feels. His voice quiet but absolute. Now, Evelyn recites the location, her tone a miracle of composure while her hands begin to shake. Frank is already in motion, murmuring into his comms. Across the room, Feels. The pen continues its desperate scratching against paper. The atmosphere is thick, a predator coiled in the dark, as somewhere in the city, Gerald Stokes is placing calls of his own, calls that are answered on the very first ring. Feels. And then there was Evelyn Blake. She had spent 2 decades constructing a fortress around her spirit, a life designed to navigate a world of men she had learned to distrust. Now she was experiencing a tectonic fracturing. Feels. The foundation of her life's work splintering beneath her. The next hour would determine if the walls she built would hold. It took Frank's people 11 minutes to arrive. Evelyn marked the passage of time. Feels. A subconscious retreat to the compulsive counting that gave her a sense of order as a child. 11 minutes after Frank's call, a text arrived. Just 2 words. Feels. She's safe. The breath she didn't know she was holding escapes her in a single violent shudder. A brutal wave of relief. She immediately rebuilds her mask of control. There are too many eyes in this room, Feels, and any crack in her facade is a vulnerability she cannot afford. She's safe, she informs Victor. He gives a short, sharp nod. He was standing near enough to see her screen, but she knew he hadn't looked. Feels. He had been counting the seconds right along with her, a silent mirror to her own gnawing fear. Stokes didn't reach her, he states. Not yet, she clarifies, the pragmatist reasserting control. We're moving faster than yet, Victor counters. Feels. He turns to Frank, the car, and Garrett, 20 minutes. Frank vanishes before the order is fully spoken. From his table, Hartman observes them, his gaze flickering to Daniel's pen as it races across the page, now nearly covered. The script is a frantic Feels, compressed scrawl, the handwriting of a man trying to outpace his own damnation. Where are you going? Hartman asks. To get your ledger, Victor answers. I'm coming, Hartman declares. No, Victor says, the word a steel door slamming shut. Feels. You stay with him until he's done. The second you leave this room, he stops. That testimony, the part still in his head, is the only thing Stokes can't bury with a national security letter. Feels. Hartman looks at Daniel, a man consumed by the fever of his own confession. 90 minutes, Hartman reminds him. Less, Victor promises, his eyes finding Evelyn. You're with me. It's an order, not an invitation. She grabs her jacket. Feels. They exit through the club's back service door. Victor, Evelyn, and Garrett. Garrett is a solid wall of a man who has been with Victor for 9 years, defined by an economy of words and an expertise in making problems cease to exist. In the damp alley, Feels. The car is already idling. Inefficiency is a terminal weakness in Frank's world. They are moving before the heavy door latches behind them. The destination? Evelyn asks. Cicero, Victor replies. A dry cleaner on Cermak Avenue. Feels. I've owned it for years, through a shell. It's a ghost asset, no paper trail back to me. For 11 years, I've kept a dummy account there. The proprietor, Petrov, maintains a storage room in the back. I'm the only person who has ever set foot inside. Feels. His focus is fixed on the road ahead as the wipers push a light drizzle across the glass. The ledger's been secured in a fireproof container in that room for the last 8 months. You moved it just after the wedding, Evelyn deduces. 3 days after, Feels, he affirms. Stokes was at my daughter's wedding. He took 40 minutes to tell me what a good man I am. 40 minutes. An innocent man doesn't need that long to sell you on his character. Feels. He goes quiet, letting the engine's drone fill the space. I didn't know what he'd done, not about the children. But I know the stench of a cover-up, and I knew that when the house of cards fell, he would need a sacrifice. I resolved it wouldn't be me. Feels. So you spent 8 months building an exit strategy. I spent 8 months ensuring I retained options. He corrects her, the distinction crucial. An exit is not the same thing as an option. She observes his profile, Feels, intermittently lit by the passing streetlights. The dash clock displays 4:17 a.m. In the strobing gloom, Victor Moretti is precisely what he seems. A man in his 60s who built an empire on choices paid for by others, now facing the final, Feels, brutal audit of his life. He doesn't appear broken. Feels. A man like Victor Moretti would never permit you to see him break. Yet the man in the car was more real than the construct she'd met just 4 hours prior. He was a person now, not simply an edifice of power. For her, Eels, this realization created a dangerous fault line in her own mind. My mother, she begins, the words slipping past barricade she'd erected during the 40-minute drive, a wall that was now failing. What you said about Stokes, about the warehouse, Eels. 14 years ago? Correct, he confirms. Are you implying she was investigating him? I am implying it is a theory consistent with the known facts, he answers, his words chosen with surgical precision. Eels. What is certain is that she was in that warehouse searching for something. The men who discovered her, Daniel's crew, reported she was holding documents. Eels. Documents, their contents a mystery. The directive, however, was brutally clear. Secure the material and ensure its source was silenced forever. The statement hung in the car's charged air. Eels. The narrative I was fed was that she was an agent for a competitor, a threat to my entire enterprise. This was Daniel's account. For 20 years, it was the truth I lived by. And you accepted it? Evelyn's query was a blade. Eels. He was the man I trusted above all others, Victor replied. That is the price of trust. It can be forged into a weapon against you, and you remain blind to it until the very last moment. My mother was a paralegal, Evelyn said, her tone flat. Eels. 16 years at a small firm downtown handling real estate and corporate law. She drifted for a second. As a child, I never grasped why she kept such long hours. Eels. I assumed it was just billable hours, the demands of a difficult profession. A pause, a breath. But if she was untangling Stokes's web of shell companies through property deeds, she would have had access to precisely that kind of data. Eels. A paralegal in a modest office, no one would perceive the danger, no one to warn her away. A frighteningly precise analysis, Victor affirmed. She wasn't some arbitrary victim, Evelyn continued. Eels. The ugly architecture of the past assembling itself in her mind. She was getting close. Someone alerted Stokes, and Stokes passed the order to Daniel. That is the configuration as I now see it, Victor concurred. Eels. The vehicle cut through the city's vacant pre-dawn arteries. A full minute of silence stretched between them. When this began, Evelyn finally spoke. I was convinced you were the monster at the end of this narrative. Eels. I know, Victor said. I came anticipating that judgment. I'm aware. She studied his profile, illuminated by the passing streetlights. You are not a good man, Victor. No, he agreed, without a trace of hesitation. I am not. Eels. But Stokes is another matter entirely, she offered. Stokes is a fundamentally different class of pathology, Victor corrected. He is a man who long ago concluded that the constructs of society were meant for lesser beings. Men like myself, Eels, we exist outside the law. It is a known variable. There is a strange integrity to it. But Stokes cloaks himself in the law. He helps author the law. He wields the very shield designed to prevent corruption as a cover for it. That, he paused, Eels, allowing the concept to land, is a different order of malevolence. Eels. Evelyn processed this. She processed the 2 decades spent architecting a case against the man she believed was the sole author of her life's central tragedy, only to find herself here in this car, Eels, realizing the true malignancy was rooted higher up the hierarchy than she had ever imagined. If Hartman succeeds in dismantling Stokes's operation, she asked, and all of this evidence is validated in court, what becomes of you, Eels? Victor was quiet for a moment. That outcome depends entirely on Hartman adhering to his promise, he stated. If he honors our arrangement, a degree of immunity, documented testimony, Eels, his backing for what follows. I might face 18 months before another prosecutor decides to re-examine the file, perhaps 2 years, Eels. And after that, he said, I must determine how to spend what time remains. He delivered the line with clinical detachment, devoid of self-pity, like a weather report. I have a daughter. She is unaware of the true scale of my history, Eels. She knows just enough to have married a man in Denver, to maintain a 1,200-mile barrier between her life and Chicago. But she is my daughter, and my actions built that barrier, a state of affairs that has endured for too long, Eels. Evelyn remained silent. I am not seeking your sympathy, he clarified. I am providing you with a psychological profile of who I am beyond this context, because you deserve to understand the man with whom you have aligned yourself, Eels. I know who I've aligned myself with, she replied. Eels. Do you? Yes, she confirmed, her voice resolute. A man who used his own body as a shield for a stranger, who had the foresight to secure a ledger 8 months ago based on nothing more than the scent of systemic decay, Eels. and the patience to wait for validation. And who listened to me argue for 40 minutes when it would have been far simpler to disengage? Her words settled in the space between them. That doesn't make you good, Victor, Eels, but it places you in an entirely different classification of person. He offered no response, but a minute. Almost imperceptible change in his posture signaled he had received the verdict. The car glided to a halt. Garrett's voice was a low bass note. Eels. Where Victor spoke. Stay with the vehicle. He looked at Evelyn. 2 minutes. Eels. They entered through a side door. The proprietor, Petrov, a man in his 70s with the build of a shipping container, Eels, who registered no surprise at a 4:30 a.m. call, possessed the weary acceptance of a man for whom unscheduled visits were a fact of life. He guided them without a word through his shop's rear to a storeroom. From that point, Eels. Victor operated from memory, a solemn ritual. He moved a particular shelving unit precisely 18 inches to its left. The action revealed a section of drywall, marked by a nearly invisible seam. Victor applied pressure to 2 points in sequence, Eels, and a concealed panel clicked open. Eels. Inside sat a fireproof steel case, matte black, roughly the size of a large art portfolio. He took it, and they were back inside the car in under 4 minutes. He passed the container to Evelyn. Its surprising weight settled in her lap. 11 years, Eels, she murmured, the words giving voice to the duration of this buried secret. 11 years, he echoed. Her eyes were fixed on the case, as if the entire psychological mass of her existence had been condensed into this single object. Within it was the data, Eels, the names, the very blueprint of a hidden world. Within it was the direct line to her genesis trauma, her mother's death, the single event 2 decades past that had forged her into the woman she had become. Eels. This is the end for Stokes, she said, a declaration of faith in how this new evidence would cement their existing case. Victor nodded. Yes, and for all those he shelters. He then offered a cold analysis of how such structures perish. Eels. An operation like his doesn't implode all at once. It splinters. The periphery senses the collapse of the core, and its agents begin to act in self-preservation. He motioned toward the box, but this initiates it. Eels. This is the first fracture in the dam. A call from Hartman broke the stillness. His name flashed on the screen. We have a complication, Hartman said. His tone had shifted. The professional composure remained, Eels, but it was being shredded by an undercurrent of stress. Daniel went silent 20 minutes ago. Eels. He requested water. I provided it. When I looked back, he had taken Mateo's cell phone. A wave of cold dread washed over Evelyn. He made contact. 1 call, Hartman specified. Mateo recovered the phone almost instantly, but a connection was made. Eels. For 42 seconds. Who was the recipient, Victor asked, his focus now absolute. An untraceable line, Hartman replied. Mateo is attempting to run it down, but he called Stokes, Evelyn concluded, the certainty a dense weight in her stomach. Eels. That's my assumption as well, Hartman affirmed. What was communicated? Victor pressed. We only have a fragment, a mention of a location, a mention of a brief pause, a reference to Cicero. The name detonated in the car's silent interior. Eels. Victor's and Evelyn's eyes met, a shared, unspoken acknowledgement of an unfolding catastrophe. He knew, Victor stated, the words a quiet confirmation of a deeply buried fear. He knew about Petrov, about the storeroom. How is that possible, Eels? Evelyn demanded. 11 years ago, when I established this, Daniel was my sole contingency plan, the one individual I trusted with the location should anything happen to me. A muscle flexed in his jaw, Eels. I informed him I had relocated the ledger 8 months ago. I never provided the new address, but if Stokes has had Daniel compromised for 2 years, the thought did not need completion, Eels. If Stokes had 2 years to extract everything Daniel knew, they have Petrov's name, Evelyn whispered. Eels. They may not have the precise location, but they possess the target, a business in Cicero with a link to you. Garrett, Victor said sharply. Time to the Meridian? 12 minutes, the driver replied. Move, Victor ordered. The car surged into motion. Eels. Evelyn gripped the heavy case, her gaze sweeping every mirror, looking for any vehicle that felt out of place. She understood that a clear tail meant nothing. A man like Stokes, who had operated from the shadows for 16 years, Eels, had no need for such rudimentary tactics to locate them. Hartman, she said, raising the phone once more. Eels. Keep this line open, she directed, her voice slicing through the air. Isolate Daniel from Mateo. Move him somewhere he is completely incommunicado, and mobilize every federal resource you can get to the Meridian. You have 15 minutes. Eels. I can't simply summon that kind of response without sufficient cause. Then manufacture it, she retorted. You are an assistant U.S. attorney holding a corruption file on a sitting senator. Leverage it. Leverage all of it. Deals. Contact your supervisor, the one who is unaware of your location, and disclose everything, immediately. Because if Daniel talked and Stokes is making a move, the events of the next 20 minutes will determine the outcome. Deals. Either we have a federal case on Monday or this night, and every person in it will cease to have ever existed. Deals. A charged stillness occupied the air. I'm handling it, Hartman affirmed before the connection severed. Victor's gaze remained on her. You're placing a great deal of trust in him. No, Evelyn clarified. Deals. I'm trusting that his compulsion to ruin Stokes outweighs his instinct for self-preservation. For tonight, that is all that matters. But as they approached the meridian 8 minutes later, the tableau was all wrong. Deals. A void of black where light should have been. Every exterior lamp on the building was extinguished, one of which, she knew for a fact, was functioning when they departed. On the pavement, Frank Caruso was a fixed point, phone to his ear, Deals, his features a study in professional composure that did little to hide the serpent of alarm tightening in his gut. Deals. It was the expression of a man witnessing the structural failure of his entire world, attempting to hold it all together by force of will alone. Victor was already in motion as the car glided to a stop, the door arcing open. Frank. Deals. Power's out on the entire block, Frank reported, his voice strained. Hit about 15 minutes back, posed as a city work crew. My men located a forced junction box down the road, and a van with no plates 2 blocks away. Who is inside? Victor pressed. Deals. Hartman and Daniel are in the rear office. I had them moved there when the power went. Got 3 of my people with them. Stokes' crew, Evelyn stated, her tone low and certain. This isn't a hit, it's a retrieval. They're here to take Daniel. Deals. Victor pivoted to her. Why take him when they can just? Because a dead Daniel becomes a martyr clutching a sworn confession. Deals. A Daniel who disappears is merely a missing person, she concluded, whose testimony evaporates with him, dismissed in court as a fiction you coerced. Stokes needs him erased, not killed. The van? Frank, give me the location, Victor began. Deals. Then cut himself short. Frank provided the coordinates. Victor's eyes locked with Garrett's. A silent question was posed and accepted with a single sharp nod. Garrett moved with a liquid quietness. Deals. 2 other figures detaching from the building's shadows to flank him. Evelyn watched them melt away, a brief window into Victor's other existence. An ecosystem of men who resolve impossible equations with brutal efficiency. Deals. Using a grammar of violence she could only witness from the outside, she moved to follow Victor into the profound dark. Deals. The back office was a cage, thick with the scent of decomposing files, and the specter of cigarettes smoked into oblivion decades prior. Hartman was there, braced against a wall, his phone a fixture at his ear and his briefcase held like a buckler. Deals. In the corner, Daniel Cross was a hollowed-out figure, one of Victor's men standing sentinel behind him, an unmoving silhouette. Daniel's face was a mask of vacancy, the look of a man who has finally grasped, far too late, Deals, the catastrophic scale of his miscalculation. The bet he placed 20 minutes ago had just cost him the world. Hartman ended his call. My supervisor is en route, he said to the room. 2 federal agents are 12 minutes away. Not fast enough. Deals. Victor stated, his voice devoid of inflection. Stokes already has pieces on the board. They're waiting outside. Deals. A tremor of real fear finally broke the surface of Hartman's composure. How many are there? We are in the process of learning that, Victor said. From his corner, Daniel's voice emerged, a monotone shard of ruin. I didn't tell him you were involved. Deals. Only about the ledger. Cicero. That was all. It was more than enough, Evelyn said. I'm aware, Daniel whispered, his focus lost in his own trembling hands. I know. Victor held him in a long, silent gaze. Deals. A moment freighted with the gravity of 2 decades. This was no longer friendship, not after a betrayal of this magnitude. It was something more ruinous. Deals. A bond built on proximity and trust that had soured into this. 2 men arriving at the desolate conclusion of a shared life, each confronting a private judgment. You are going to finish that statement. Deals. The order was absolute. Every last name, every transaction you know Stokes orchestrated, you will commit to paper. You will sign it, and you will hand it to Hartman before those agents step into this room. And if I do that, Daniel began, Deals, a fragile hope kindling in his deadened eyes. If you do that, Victor interrupted, your fate ceases to be my concern. But you will meet it with a signed confession and a single final act of compliance on your ledger. It is more than you have earned. Deals. and it is a far better position than the one you occupied 10 minutes ago. Daniel's gaze dropped to the legal pad on the desk. His hand reached for the pen. He started to write. Evelyn placed the fireproof case on the table. Its landing was a soft, Heels dense thud in the tense quiet. The ledger, she announced. Heels. 11 years of his dealings. Every name, every date, every single payment. She allowed the statement to permeate the room. It contains Stokes, with records predating the terminal files. It also holds the deeds to the Southside warehouse. Heels. The property where my mother was murdered 14 years ago. A direct line to Stokes' network, proving he used that site to make his problems vanish. Hartman's eyes shifted from the case to her face, a new depth of comprehension dawning within them. Heels. You understand what you're surrendering. I understand precisely what I am surrendering, she answered, her voice unwavering. I have understood for 20 years. Hartman placed a hand on the container. This is sufficient, he said. Heels, his voice barely audible. With this and with Daniel's statement, sealed or otherwise, we can shatter that classification. Heels. The evidence within this box is enough to secure a grand jury indictment. He let the weight of the words settle. It is enough to burn his entire world to ash. Not of throat-clearing I'm aware, was Evelyn's flat reply. From outside, a sudden, Heels. Sharp metallic clang fractured the stillness. Not a firearm, something more substantial. It was followed by the low groan of a straining engine, and the scream of tires finding traction on pavement. Heels. Snort. Evelyn's hand clenched into a fist at her side, grasping at empty air. Victor's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen, and the rigid line of his jaw softened almost imperceptibly. Garrett, he said into the phone. The van is gone. A pause. Heels. 3 hostiles are proceeding on foot. Another pause. No contact. For the second time in one night, Evelyn felt the release of a held breath. Heels. They understood their window had closed, she concluded. Stokes made a tactical error, Victor observed. He failed to anticipate Hartman could secure federal assets this quickly. His error was making the initial call, she corrected. Heels. Every move he has made tonight has been reactive. This isn't his methodology. His composure is breaking. Good, Victor said. It also implies his next move will be something different, she predicted, and he will not be subtle this time. Heels. Victor's eyes met hers. Let him try. That is a remarkable degree of confidence, she remarked. It's a practical analysis, he countered. Hartman possesses the ledger. Daniel is concluding his confession he checked his watch. 8 minutes, Heels. At which point 2 federal agents will be present, and this becomes official business. Stokes is powerless to intervene. His security directive applies only to the terminal records. Heels. Not to this. His gesture encompassed the box, the legal pad, the entire room. He played his card, and it was insufficient. Whatever he attempts now will be an act of desperation, and desperate men are prone to mistakes. Hartman's phone chimed. Heels. He took the call, listening for a full 30 seconds, and the expression that settled on his face captured the room's undivided attention. That was my supervisor, Hartman stated. What is the development? Victor demanded. 40 minutes ago, Heels. Hartman started. Gerald Stokes tendered a resignation from the United States Senate. He cited personal reasons and will be making no additional comment. A heavy silence descended on the space. Then, without pausing his pen, Heels, Daniel Cross spoke to the tabletop. He's making a run for it. He cannot outrun this, Evelyn said. Heels. He is attempting to, Hartman clarified. Resigning forfeits certain protections, but it doesn't nullify the crime. In some respects, it simplifies his prosecution. We are no longer required to navigate the procedural minefield of a sitting senator, Heels. He looked directly at Evelyn. He is aware of the ledger. He knows Daniel is cooperating. He's trying to get out in front of the narrative. He is 16 years too late to get ahead of anything, she stated. The door opened and Frank Caruso entered, Heels, his eyes on Victor. 2 feds at the entrance. They're asking for Agent Hartman of throat clearing. Hartman adjusted the lay of his suit jacket. Heels. He picked up his briefcase. He took possession of the fireproof box. He looked at Victor Moretti, a name that had shadowed more federal investigations in Illinois than any other for 2 decades, and spoke. I was sincere in what I said earlier, Heels. Regarding our arrangement, I know, Victor confirmed. This is about to become complicated. Certain people in my office will not approve of the terms. My entire existence has been a negotiation with men who do not approve of the terms, Heels. Victor responded. The faintest trace of a smile touched Hartman's lips. Somehow, I find that entirely believable. His attention shifted to Evelyn. I will need you to come with me. There are aspects of this these agents must hear from you directly. Eels. A single nod was her only response. Her eyes were on Victor Moretti, a sovereign standing in the quiet wreckage of his jazz club at 5 in the morning, while a federal case roared to life just beyond the door. His eyes met hers. In them, Eels, he saw the woman who had entered 6 hours before, and with nothing more than a question, a box of old files, and 2 decades of relentless patience, had systematically dismantled his world to get to hers. His voice was a near whisper. Eels, you have what you came for. Not yet, she credit her voice precise. Not until it is concluded. It will be concluded, he assured her. It will require time, but it will happen. She held his gaze a moment longer, Eels, then turned and followed Hartman out. In their wake, Victor Moretti sank into the room's sole remaining chair, placed his elbows on his knees, and for the first time in memory did absolutely nothing. Eels. He simply sat. He breathed. Around him, the night finally settled, an exhausted predator that had ceased its struggle. The scratch of Daniel Cross's pen was the only sound as he continued to write. Outside, Eels. The absolute black at the horizon had started to soften, bleeding into the faintest hint of gray. This wasn't dawn, but the prelude to it. That moment when darkness thins just before it shatters. And below, Chicago remained, Eels. Exactly where it had always been, a city suspended, waiting to discover what it would become in the light. In the cramped corridor at 5:14 a.m., the 2 federal agents, Reyes and Doherty, Eels, displayed the impassive discipline of their profession as Hartman presented Evelyn. Eels. Reyes, a compact woman in her 30s, possessed sharp eyes that seemed to deconstruct the room in less than 4 seconds. Doherty, older, perhaps 50, moved with a deliberate economy. Eels. The kind a man develops after learning not to expend energy on anything that doesn't advance his purpose. Their questions were surgical. Eels. Evelyn provided the answers she had been refining in the confines of her mind for 2 decades. Answers that were clean, hard, and irrefutable. She guided them through the chronology of the documents, her search methodologies, Eels, and the flawless chain of custody for every piece of evidence in Hartman's possession. She dissected the national security order, the terminal records, and explained with precision why the ledger existed on a separate evidentiary path, Eels, untouchable by that directive. Eels. And then she introduced the subject of her mother. In that instant, Reyes stopped writing. Are you asserting a connection between the 2004 homicide of Margaret Blake and the network under investigation tonight? Reyes inquired. Eels. I am asserting that the documents prove it, Evelyn replied, her tone devoid of emotion. Whether that satisfies your legal threshold is a matter for the attorneys. But yes, that is precisely my assertion. Reyes exchanged a look with Doherty, Eels, who was now absorbed by his notepad. Messrs. Blake, Doherty started, I need to clarify your position in this. You've maintained a private inquiry into Senator Stokes for 3 years, in concert with 20 years in total, she corrected. Eels. The initial years were foundational. Eels. Foundational? Doherty echoed. I was acquiring a necessary skill set, she clarified. Such a process requires time. Doherty made a notation. And your source within the shipping consultancy, the party whose safety was of concern? She is secure, Eels. Evelyn stated. Victor Moretti's associates have extracted her. She will require formal protection as a material witness. I am asking that you make that an immediate priority following this debrief. Reyes was already manipulating her phone. Eels. From the doorway, Hartman's voice cut in. The subject, Bert Bond, who also goes by Daniel Cross, has completed his statement. Doherty rose. I'll receive it. He exited through the door. Eels. Evelyn registered the brief, toneless quality of Daniel's voice, the sound of a man who, after hours of testimony, possesses no reserves with which to mount a defense. The door closed. The hallway now held only Evelyn, Reyes, and Hartman. Reyes spoke. Eels. You should be aware Gerald Stokes's counsel contacted our office 40 minutes ago. They are alleging the ledger was illegally procured. They intend to file a motion to have any derivative evidence suppressed. This was an expected move, Eels. It was as inevitable as the storm that follows a sky that has spent all day darkening. The ledger is the private property of Victor Moretti, she stated. Eels. That evidence was given voluntarily, under the terms of a cooperation agreement already established with Hartman. Any assertion of illegal procurement is without merit. Reyes's expression was unreadable. Eels. Stokes's attorney will advance the argument regardless. He will advance every argument available to him. Evelyn retorted. He is compensated to do so. But Hartman has spent 3 years constructing this case. The ledger's provenance is clean, Eels. Daniel's statement corroborates it. The documents I located will withstand the challenge over classified records. The method of their discovery is impeccable. A beat of silence. Stokes tendered his resignation an hour ago, Eels. His lawyer's doing what his client is doing. Delay, suppress, confuse. It is a futile strategy against the weight of what we have, Reyes observed her. You have practiced this debrief, Eels. I have practiced every conceivable conversation within this building for a considerable time, Evelyn confirmed. Eels. The barest flicker of a smile graced Reyes's lips. It was there and then it was gone. A formal deposition will be required, she said, within the next 48 hours. Your complete account on the record, with counsel present. I will be there, Eels, Evelyn said. You will need to remain in Chicago, Reyes informed her, until witness protection for your source is finalized, as we ascertain the full scope of your involvement. I have no plans to leave, Evelyn stated. Reyes nodded once, Eels, then retreated down the hall. Hartman waited until she was out of sight before he moved closer. How are you managing? He asked, his voice low. Evelyn merely looked at him. He was the one person who knew the substance of her actions, and their cost, Eels, having spent 3 years watching, asking the questions no one else would have conceived. Eels. He was the sole witness to the life she had been compelled to construct. I'm stable, Evelyn answered. I am functional, she amended. And tonight, those are synonymous. He understood. He knew her well enough to recognize the distinction she was drawing. Eels. The deposition will be difficult, he cautioned. Placing your mother's history on the record in that way. I am aware of exactly what is required of me, she replied. This is not new terrain. It doesn't have to be your burden to carry alone. Eels. Her gaze met his. James, I have carried this alone since I was 17 years old. I know how to manage it. He paused for a moment. What you accomplished tonight was extraordinary, he told her. Eels. It is vital you hear that from someone who witnessed it. She did not reply immediately. Her gaze dropped to the floor, then lifted to meet his again. It is not over, she said. Do not offer such sentiments until it is truly concluded. Understood, Eels, he replied, and then he was gone, disappearing back through the office door. She was alone in the corridor, genuinely alone for the first time in the 9 hours since she had entered the Meridian. And she permitted herself to feel a fraction of it, Eels, not the entirety. There was no internal space safe enough to contain the entirety of it yet, but just enough, the razor's edge. The truth that everything had proceeded according to her design, Eels, and that everything had simultaneously veered completely from it. Both statements were true, and she was still standing. Eels. She pushed away from the wall and walked back toward the club's main room. Victor was seated precisely where she had left him, forearms resting on his knees. He looked up as she came near. Frank Caruso occupied a chair across from him, Eels. The other men had receded to the room's perimeter, in the way men do when they await new orders. The fireproof box was gone, transferred to Hartman. The legal pad containing Daniel's confession was also gone. What remained was the room, Eels, the men inside it, and the profound bone-deep quiet that settles after an operation's conclusion. Stokes's counsel is filing a motion to suppress the ledger, she said. Victor produced a sound that was a dry, analytical approximation of a laugh. Eels. A motion he has no possibility of winning. Correct, she concurred. He will not. She claimed the chair opposite him. Frank had already risen and retreated without instruction. Reyes will require your cooperation for the deposition, specifically, Eels. Testimony on the ledger's chain of custody and the circumstances of its transfer. I will cooperate, Victor affirmed. They will attack the cooperation deal itself, she continued. Stokes's team will claim you were coerced, Eels, that Hartman leveraged the trafficking charges to manipulate you into an agreement you would have otherwise refused. Hartman forced nothing, Victor stated. I initiated the contact. I am aware, she said. Eels, it is crucial that you make that explicit on the record. It will be made clear, he confirmed. She studied him for a second. There is another matter. He said nothing, simply waiting. The documents pertaining to the warehouse, she began. Eels. Once they are submitted as evidence, once my mother's death is integrated into the evidentiary chain, it becomes public record. The particulars of her death, the how, the why, the who, all of it will surface. Yes, Victor said. Eels. Frank was present, she stated. Across the room, Frank Caruso's frame shifted, an almost imperceptible adjustment, yet he maintained his silence. I know, Victor said. Hartman will require his statement as well, she said, regarding that night. Eels. What he observed, what he did, and what he failed to do. Eels. I know, Victor repeated, the words a quiet finality. He shifted his gaze, heavy with consequence, toward Frank. Frank. The older man moved forward, assuming a position before them like a figure in a Greek tragedy. Eels. Having wrestled with his demons off stage and now emerging into the light to deliver a final damning truth, he cleared his throat. I'll give the statement, he said, his voice scraped raw by the weight of the choice. Everything, Eels. Whatever Hartman requires. Evelyn's focus locked onto him. That will result in charges against you, she observed. The words a cold, factual stone dropped into a deep well. You understand that? I understand, Frank breathed. Eels. I am 73 years old. I've had 30 years more than your mother was given, I understand. She held his gaze, an unbroken connection between them. Eels. There was no absolution she could grant. She had told him as much, and it was a simple, unvarnished truth, less a judgment than a stark reflection of her own fractured soul. Eels. And still, a strange, hollow sense of closure settled in as she watched this man, a ghost from the very origin of her life's most profound trauma, now choosing at the end of all things to carve its truth into the official ledger. Eels. It was a moment that had no name. Okay, she finally breathed. Okay, he echoed, a covenant formed in the quiet. Victor said there was something I've kept from you both. He spoke with the deliberate pace of a man who had held one last, decisive card. Eels. Not for personal gain, but for the singular moment its playing could redefine the entire game, a moment that had finally come. Evelyn observed him, a statue of stillness. The papers your mother was carrying, he started. Eels. The ones they found with her in that warehouse. Daniel sold the story that they were confiscated and incinerated. That's the version he gave me 2 decades ago, and the one I chose to accept. Yes, she affirmed. Eels. 2 years ago, Victor's voice cut in, sharp against the heavy air. Daniel approached me about a business deal to buy out a defaulted storage locker in Bridgeport. Eels. It was a routine acquisition. The contents were mine. I dispatched a man to inventory it. He paused, allowing the silence to thicken. Inside the locker was a single tape box. That box contained documents, financial records, deals, property deeds, incorporation papers. I paid them little mind at the time. They were cataloged and archived. It is my standard procedure for any asset. Evelyn had become so still, she could have been sculpted from frost. Deals. When I relocated the ledger 8 months ago, Victor continued, I conducted a full review of my secure holdings, that box included. His gaze locked with hers, anchoring her to the spot. They were your mother's files, Evelyn. Daniel never burned them. Deals. He hid them. Deals. For 20 years he held them in reserve. A weapon of last resort, perhaps. Insurance for a day he might be cornered with no other way out. He never deployed them, never destroyed them. They simply remained, suspended in time. What was in them? Deals, she asked, her voice a thread of sound. Everything, Victor stated, his tone low and ruinous. A perfect, Deals. Uninterrupted chain of evidence that connected 6 of Stokes's shell corporations through a maze of real estate transactions stretching back 18 years. Your mother's handwriting annotated the margins. Her theories on what each transaction signified, Deals. Questions she hadn't yet answered. Names circled in red ink. He let the words settle. She was weeks, maybe days, from a case so solid she could take it to someone with the power to act. The sheer scale of it landed not as a thought in Evelyn's mind, Eels, but as a physical pressure expelling the air from her chest. Eels. Her mother wasn't merely a casualty. She hadn't accidentally wandered into the crossfire. She had been fighting the very same war Evelyn had waged for 2 decades, constructing a case, detail by excruciating detail, Eels, following the flow of money as it seeped through the fortifications built by men like Stokes. But she had waged it alone, without a Hartman, without a Victor, without 20 years to temper her spirit for the conflict. A paralegal. Eels. Operating from a small real estate office, for motives Evelyn was just starting to comprehend and would likely spend a lifetime deciphering. 3 weeks from victory, and then someone tipped off Stokes. Where are the documents now? Eels. Evelyn's voice was a perfectly calibrated instrument of chilling calm. Eels. A choice had been forged in the last 36 seconds. This truth would not be permitted to break her. Not in this place. Not on this night. It would be taken, and it would be placed within the hermetically sealed vault with every other trauma. Eels. The lock thrown deep inside her mind. She would unseal it later in solitude when she could bear the full catastrophic impact. They're in the ledger box, Victor answered. Along with everything else, Hartman has them. She gave a single, sharp nod. Feels. He would understand their significance the instant he saw them. Yes, Victor confirmed. I made sure they were marked, set aside from the rest. She studied him. You've known this for 8 months. Yes, and you held back, Feels. I didn't know what I was waiting for, he admitted, or for whom. But I knew a final act was coming. I wanted the protagonist to be holding all the cards when the curtain finally went up. Feels. You could have just taken it to Hartman, she countered. I could have, he agreed. But I lack faith in a system that doesn't have an agent within it. Someone whose drive to see it through is rooted in something deeper than a career. He paused, Feels, his gaze sharpening. Your mother had that drive. It is what she left you. You had to be present in this room. It was the only configuration that worked. Feels. Evelyn looked at the man before her, the figure she had cast for 2 decades as the central villain of her narrative, the architect of her suffering, who was now revealing himself to be something far more layered, infinitely more human. Feels. The narrative she had constructed for her own survival was beginning to fracture. This wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't warmth. It was a violent remapping of her entire world. An acknowledgement that reality is a far more chaotic thing than the stark, Feels. Black and white story, a 17-year-old girl needed to escape an alleyway clutching a photograph. This new, devastating complexity didn't erase the wound, nor did it forgive the sins committed against her, Feels, but it fundamentally altered the nature of the conclusion. Justice was not the clean, righteous vision of an adolescent. It was this room, these fractured people, this slow, imperfect, grinding engine of truth. Her phone vibrated, Feels, a sharp rip in the quiet tension. Hartman, she said into it. I'm examining the contents of the container, he stated. His voice had a new timbre, Feels, a strange resonance between professional awe and furious triumph, the sound of a man discovering a lost artifact he had long since given up on. Feels. Evelyn, you are in possession of the Adair case files. I'm aware of the contents, she confirmed. A moment of silence stretched across the line. Your mother, he said, words heavy with revelation. Yes, she built the identical case, he remarked. Feels. 18 years ago, from an entirely different vector, with different assets, and she saw Evelyn, her work was more thorough. The network of shell companies she mapped goes 3 levels deeper than anything we found. Feels. Her notes contain names that exist nowhere in our own investigation. What does this do to our case? She asked. It doesn't alter the foundation, he answered. The case was already solid, Feels. But the names in her notes, 2 sitting federal judges in this state, are documented as beneficiaries of one of Stokes's financial entities. Feels. This is not just one more component. This is the keystone. The very reason the national security order was enacted tonight. It's Stokes's man. Hartman, Victor's voice was a low growl. He was positioned close enough to overhear. Which judges? Feels. Hartman gave him the names. Frank Caruso seemed to fold inward, a puppet whose strings had just been severed, slumping into a chair. Victor did not so much as flinch, but his face transformed, settling into a mask Evelyn had never seen. It became remote, Feels, cold, profoundly private. It was the expression of a man realizing a cancer he believed to be isolated had already spread to the very bones of the framework meant to sustain him. The national security order is void, Evelyn declared. Feels, it has been compromised. Feels. That's correct, Hartman affirmed. A judge with a financial interest signing a protective order for that same interest is not a legal maneuver. It is obstruction. This means the terminal archives are no longer legally sealed. Feels, which means everything is in play, she concluded for him. Affirmative, he confirmed. Rise is already making moves. By 0800 tomorrow, every single file at the Calumet terminal will be admissible evidence, Feels, with an untainted chain of custody. Any attempt to suppress is dead before it starts. Stokes has just lost the only gambit he had left that might have saved him. She added, he'll flee. He already made an attempt, Hartman said. Feels. His passport was flagged at the airport 40 minutes ago. Feels. He is contained at his Kenilworth estate. Federal agents have secured the perimeter. Evelyn shut her eyes for a precise count of 3 seconds. When she opened them, the room was unchanged. The people were still. Feels. But the reality binding them had shattered and reassembled into its final unalterable form. What is my next move? She asked. Nothing, Hartman said. Find a seat. Sit down. I will contact you at 0800. The connection ended. Feels. Victor studied her. She held his gaze. It's finished, she stated. Report, he ordered. And so she did. She relayed everything. The judges, The nullified order, the terminal records being prized open, the flagged passport, heels, the federal cordon tightening around Stokes's property, heels. She laid out the truth with the same clinical precision she applied to all things. Even here, in the pre-dawn silence at 5:47, at the conclusion of the longest campaign of her life, heels, she was a person who marshaled facts before she would ever permit their release. Once she was done, Victor tilted his head back, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. Frank Caruso planted his palms on his knees, regulating his breathing into a measured cadence. Heels. The atmosphere in the room was a sustained, silent chord. Then Victor's voice broke through. "Your mother laid the foundations," Evelyn agreed, "and you constructed the house on top of it." A moment passed. Her thoughts had drifted, heels to Margaret Blake, to the notes staining the margins in ink, the circled names, the threads of inquiry left dangling in time. Heels. For 2 decades, a sealed container sat in a Bridgeport storage facility, a secret that had outlasted the man tasked with its destruction. Because even a man like Daniel Cross, in some knotted recess of what he might call a soul, heels, could not complete the act of final erasure. 2 people constructed it, Evelyn stated, her voice slicing through the quiet. She just wasn't aware she had a collaborator. Victor observed her, heels, his face that of a traveler who has strayed from the path, and now stands in an unfamiliar country, attempting to decipher the alien topography of his new existence. "And what is the projection from here?" he inquired, heels. "A deposition within 48 hours, she replied. "Witness preparation. I anticipate 6 months of federal proceedings, possibly longer. It will hinge on the intensity of the fight Stokes's legal team chooses to mount." Heels. She halted at that point. Past that event horizon, there was only void. She had never permitted herself to imagine a course beyond that one singular objective. The aftermath was a territory on a map she had never intended to explore. "I don't know," heels, she admitted, the admission feeling alien on her tongue. "I have been so focused on this single point for so long, I'm not sure I know how to focus on anything else." "You will learn," Victor said. "You are a creator. You will create something new." Heels. She looked toward him, an unspoken question in her gaze. "Is that your plan as well?" "My plan begins with a call to my daughter," he replied. "In Denver, I intend to tell her I want to visit, to meet her children, in person, not mediated through a screen." Heels. He paused, the gravity of his words settling in the space between them. Heels. "She has 2, a son and a daughter. I have never shared a physical space with them." Evelyn remained silent. "That is a unique form of devastation," he said, more to the room than to her. "The kind that results from constructing the wrong edifice." Heels. "It compromises the foundations of everything around it, the structures you never wanted to damage." "I understand," she said, her tone hushed. "I have no doubt you do," he answered. "You have your own 20-year void. My mother's was deeper." Heels, she retorted. "I make a point to keep that truth in its proper perspective." Victor offered a slow, deliberate nod. He lifted himself from the chair. He was a tall man, heels, and his movements had the measured gravity of one who had long ago understood that motion itself was a currency of power. Even here, at the dissolution of all things, that aura remained. Heels. Not the influence he wielded 12 hours earlier, the absolute power of a man whose decrees were law, but something altered, something shattered and reformed. Heels. He extended his hand. She examined it for a beat before accepting. There was no warmth, no coldness. It was the handshake of 2 people who had endured the same disaster, where the act of surviving fosters not a friendship but a peculiar, Heels, unspoken recognition. "I will be present at the deposition," he stated. "Whatever date Hartman chooses, I will attend." "I know," she said. He released her hand. He looked over at Frank. Frank got to his feet. They moved toward the door as one, Heels. 2 men who had inhabited the same universe for 4 decades, now crossing into another whose contours were undefined, a terrain they would have to learn to map out one painful day at a time. Heels. Victor paused at the doorway. Without turning back, he spoke to the dim light of the hall. "For what it's worth," he said, "she would have felt a great pride, not because you completed her work, but in the manner you achieved it." A beat of silence. Heels. She raised someone capable of entering the most perilous room in Chicago and forcing the truth to be acknowledged. "That is a formidable thing, Evelyn." She offered no response. She simply stood, listening for the sound of the door closing, a final, Heels, certain click. Only after it came did she cross to the bar, the precise spot where she had stood 6 hours earlier and delivered a masterful lie to topple a 20-year dynasty, placing her palms flat against the cool mahogany, and just breathed. Heels. She allowed the memory of her mother to take shape in her mind. Not the investigation, not the files, not the target's network or the statistical odds of success. Only the person, the way her fingers curled around a coffee mug. The timbre of her voice feels, a spectral note from a long-vanished morning. The picture Evelyn had snatched from the alley, the one that had been a secret lining in every coat she had owned for 2 decades. She drew it from an inner pocket, placing it on the bar. Heels. Margaret Blake looked back. 41 years old, alive, completely oblivious to the final chapter already composed for her, but laboring in borrowed hours, in the empty spaces of a life where she was systematically dismissed. Heels. Charting the currents of capital through the barriers that powerful men erect. She was confronting a system she must have known was larger than her, with instruments she must have known were inadequate. Because a person feels, must, because one simply must. Evelyn returned the photo to her pocket. She took out her phone, dialing a number she had protected like a sacrament for 20 years. A therapist in a city she once inhabited under an assumed identity. Heels. The woman who had helped her construct the fortress within her own psyche and showed her how to live inside it. The one who explained that the most difficult part of survival isn't the trauma itself, but discovering what to do after you are finally through. Heels. The phone rang 3 times. The therapist picked up. She was not sleeping. She hadn't been for some time. "It's me," Evelyn said. "I know," the therapist responded. "I've been waiting for your call." "It's finished," Evelyn exhaled. "I'm in a quiet space." Heels. A long, warm, uncomplicated quiet. "Then it is time to come home," the therapist said, "wherever home happens to be for you now." Heels. "Come home and we can begin to sort out what comes next." Evelyn's gaze traced the lines of the room, the bar, the abandoned glasses, a stage where the drama had concluded for the evening, leaving only an empty set. "Okay," she whispered. Outside, Heels. The city was just beginning to lighten into its initial shade of dawn. The thoroughfares of the streets were starting to stir. In a grand home in Kenilworth, Gerald Stokes was observing federal agents crossing his property. Heels. The final seconds of his autonomy counting down. Miles away in Denver, a woman named Maria was about to take a phone call from her father, a call that would mark the first step across the immense, silent expanse between them. Heels. And in a federal building, an agent named Hartman was breaking the seal on a fireproof vault, about to discover the combined life's work of 2 women across 2 decades, a mother who located the first errant thread, and a daughter who pulled on it until the whole corrupt design unraveled, demonstrating that justice, when it finally comes, is rarely the kind of salvation its architects ever thought it would be. Heels. Evelyn Blake exited the Meridian building, emerging into the dawn of a city that had no inkling its entire world had been fundamentally reordered while it slept. She had entered as a phantom, a construct with no official existence. She departed as herself, and the reality was this. After 20 years devoted to fabricating a life just to endure, the simple act of becoming herself once more was the single most frightening thing she had ever undertaken.